Welcome to the 16th episode of our podcast. Today I'm joined by Bjarni, who's originally from Denmark, but he's been all around the world. He's an independent financial advisor and coach who has quite literally rich experience from EU agencies.
All of my previous schools abroad, international schools where I was studying and had friends who were from Sri Lanka or India, America, Korea, all kinds of places, suddenly I was in an extremely homogenous British environment. And it's now called the Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. It was called in the past the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. It's the same tribunal as the Rwanda Tribunal for the genocide in Rwanda. I was really proud of working for that organization because they've successfully jailed over 100 war criminals. You're not choosing winners and losers, you're just tracking the whole market. So the market tends to go up to the right over time. As Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, many others say, you cannot beat the market, so just buy the whole market. I always pushing beyond the boundaries of what you're supposed to be doing in your job. Volunteering or just doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing, taking decisions which are above your pay grade. Honestly, these tricks grow your career fast.
This is Expat Episodes, where new stories begin. I'm Martin, your host, and I'll be guiding you through the stories of expats in the Czech Republic. Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Bjarni Nash, which is the first, perhaps, interesting thing about me. I hope not the most interesting thing about me, but I have a strange name. And it's because my mother was Danish and my father is English. So the Bjarni part is Danish. Well, actually, it's Icelandic. Don't ask me why they chose that. And Nash is a very traditional English name. So I'm half British, half Danish, and I've been living here in the Moravsko-Slezsky region for about 5 years now. 4 years. 1 year in Prague before that.
I see. So, what's your story?
Gosh, I mean, where to begin? I suppose from the beginning. I'm a lifelong expat. My parents moved me to India when I was 10 weeks old. And that's where my sort of lifelong addiction or obsession with traveling and living abroad started. So as a child, I lived in India for 3 years because my father was a civil servant and he worked for the British Foreign Ministry. And then I went to the UK for 1 year when I was 3 or 4 years old, and then 5 years in Vienna in Austria. So these are my first memories of childhood were in Vienna in Austria. Then we lived for 3 years in Sri Lanka. So I finally moved back properly to my own home country of the UK, or one of my home countries, when I was about 13 or 14 years old. And interestingly enough, as a British person, or a half British person, that was the biggest culture shock I'd ever experienced in my whole life. Was after India, Sri Lanka, Austria, moving to my own country was the strangest thing I'd ever done, because it was the first time I experienced things like school uniforms, living and studying in a homogenous environment. So instead of all of my previous schools abroad, international schools where I was studying and had friends who were from Sri Lanka or India, America, Korea, all kinds of places, suddenly I was in an extremely homogenous British environment, and that was actually quite difficult for me, I remember, as a 13 or 14-year-old. And so I finished my teenage years in the UK, finished high school, did my bachelor's degree in the UK, and then before I'd even finished my bachelor's, I realized it wasn't necessarily the right place for me. I didn't feel in my own skin well, maybe not being an expat for some reason, because that's what I'd always been before. So before I even finished my bachelor's, I applied for an internship in the Netherlands. because I had been studying criminology. So I managed, very luckily perhaps, to get an internship in Europol, which is a European Union agency for law enforcement. And somehow, I mean, talk of extreme luck, they had made a mistake and assumed that I was a police officer somehow, rather than a criminology student, because these types of internships were actually 6-month placements for law enforcement officers from around the European Union. But they sent me the offer, I moved to the Netherlands, and basically 1 or 2 weeks before starting that internship, they discovered I wasn't a police officer, and obviously I was like, okay, but I've already paid for an apartment and everything, you know? So they kind of figured it out. I managed somehow to fast track my security clearance with the British authorities and get this amazing internship, which was reserved for people who were police officers. So that was really fortunate and lucky experience for a 23-year-old who hadn't even finished his bachelor's degree. So that got me started. I went back to the UK after that internship, and I finished my dissertation or whatever. And immediately when I finished, I moved to Denmark because my mother was Danish. We had spent every summer of my life, my childhood, in Denmark, even when we lived all around the world. We used to fly back and spend several weeks, 4, 5, 6 weeks at my mother's cottage in Denmark, which we still have. So I even as a small child, I always had an idea that one day I would live in Denmark. And I was like, okay, now's the time, you know? I finished that internship. I managed to finish quite badly my first university degree. I was never a good student. I got very low marks. Nonetheless, luck seems to follow me sometimes in my life. And so I moved to Denmark. I started working in an English pub in Copenhagen. And that was a fantastic 1.5 years of my life. I mean, in some ways, I wish that phase of my life had just continued because I was having so much fun. And, you know, as a young adult, that was the first time I really did something completely spontaneous, a bit reckless, because, you know, with that internship, I had in a way started falling down some kind of potential career direction. But I went to work in a bar and I was having good fun, so no problem there. But Europol, where I had done the internship, contacted me 1.5 years later asking whether I would be interested in taking a sort of entry-level position. And at that time, of course, it was interesting to me. You know, if you get offered a job which, you know, is to do with serious organized crime, it sounds cool, and actually it is cool if you're working on the cool stuff. So it was an opportunity not to be missed. So I took that job and I moved back to the Netherlands. And funnily enough, even though I was a criminologist and I had been working in the serious crime department, after a few months I moved internally in Europol to the administration, and I started working in the procurement department. And again, just going with the flow, I was not bad at it, maybe even good at it, so I just continued with that work. I applied for a more senior role in that department, and I got it. And from there, my whole career became about procurement. So that became my expertise. In the evenings and weekends, I started studying for my law masters, and I specialized in European procurement law and European law, which was tough going for a while, you know, working full time and doing a master's abroad, which required me to travel to Nottingham in the UK every once in a while for a weekend of workshops and things like that. Forgive me, because it's now, you know, 25 years since I left high school, and I'm starting to lose track of what happened when, Yeah, so once I reached a certain, level, sort of senior expert, something like that, or middle level expert in procurement, and I had my master's in procurement, I decided to, if I wanted to grow my career more, that it's better to move organization or country to move up rather than try and fight internally. I think that's something I quickly learned in my career. If you want to move up, it's better to move out. I mean, if you're talking about money, the people who make the most money, they move every 2 or 3 years. They don't fight to get 6% raise instead of 4% every year, something like that. So I applied for a job and got it in Paris. This was one of the big benefits and things that kept me in that career for as long as it did. It allowed me to travel a lot because my expertise was enough in demand that organizations from all around Europe were willing to hire me under, reasonable conditions. So I moved to Paris, which sounds awesome. But for me, I moved to Paris because of the job, because it was a higher opportunity, because it was a way to move forward professionally. So I was not the person who moved to Paris because it was a dream and because it's the city of love and because of the Eiffel Tower. But after 1 or 2 years, I really did fall in love with Paris. It is an amazing city. It's stunningly beautiful. If you look up from the pavement level where everything smells of pee and there's trash everywhere, if you look anywhere up, it's just stunningly beautiful and your day gets better. And in Paris, I met a Czech girl around 2016, which was in a way a big year for me. My mother passed away that year. I left a long-term relationship and I met this Czech girl, Teresa, from Opava, who I knew another Czech girl who I worked with. And I was walking past a pub close to my office one day after work. And I saw this colleague of mine, Sharka, in the pub talking to another girl. So I was like, okay, I'll go in for a beer, say hi to Sharka. And it was this girl, Teresa. And she was very tall. I think she's 193. And very beautiful. And I was completely intimidated. But I put on a good show, confident, all that stuff. And, I later learned that in that first meeting, she thought I was a bit of a douche, a bit arrogant, too confident, and I was like, that's so funny because inside I was dying from nerves. I was like, Jesus, she's gorgeous and I don't know what I'll say to her, Anyway, that was a brief meeting, and 6 months after that, at the coffee machine in the office, she was standing next to me. Her friend had got her a job in the same European specialized agency that I was working in at the time. So that was amazing. My year went from, my mother passing away to in a way being the best year of my life, because it really was. And this Czech girl who was in Paris from pure love of the city, she showed me how to love Paris, and I finally got this kind of movie romance in Paris, So that was cool for me. It was something I wasn't expecting. And about a year after I met her, I was faced with a difficult decision. I mean, okay, I put myself in that decision by applying for another more senior role. I wanted to, or I thought maybe I still wanted to keep pushing at my career. So there was a head of procurement department job in Malta for the European Union response to the asylum crisis, which started in 2016. the European Union was trying to, implement some kind of response to that crisis, and they established an agency in Malta, and they were growing enormously. It was a big opportunity. I could lead a team of 10 or 12 people. So Teresa didn't really want to go. In the end, we decided we would go and give it a try. And in the end, it was a great experience and it was a bad experience. I mean, Malta is hot. It's the first country I've ever lived which I didn't particularly like. Very polluted, very congested roads, not much nature. And I'm not knocking Malta because there are things that I like about it as well. It just wasn't for me because I need to see trees. I need a place to go that's calm. And there's I don't know if it's 500,000, 400,000 people on an island, which is 20 by 10. It's a bit like confined. So we were there for a year. I faced some sorts of work challenges that I'd never faced before, which, in combination with my mother's passing, meeting Teresa, facing very difficult problems at work, including a police investigation of the or law enforcement investigation, a corruption investigation of the organization I worked for, which was very challenging for all of us who worked in that company. That whole experience basically made me stop for the first time in 7 or 8 years in that career path and say, is this something I really want? First of all, I learned I'm not particularly interested in being the manager of a department of 10 or 12 people. The problem's not because I don't like working together with and leading people. The problem is the work then became about reporting, politics, when you get to that level of management. So it stopped being fun. Eventually we left Malta. Teresa got a job in the Netherlands, so we moved back to the Netherlands, where we stayed for 2 years. I changed from the European Union, where I had worked for 3 different specialized agencies, and I moved to the United Nations. It's now called the Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, but it's famously, it was called in the past the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. So it's the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague, which was great and it was very refreshing. I always wanted to try working for the United Nations. When I was a little boy living in Sri Lanka, I visited refugee camps with my father. There was a war going on, so I saw the blue helmets, I saw the UN food program, all these things helping people. And as perhaps slightly naive or idealistic child, I thought, when I grow up, I want to work for the UN. So in 2019, I finally got a chance, and I did something else which was very challenging to the ego, which is I went from being the head of a procurement department to being the assistant in a procurement unit, which was great because I knew how to do the work. If I wanted, I could help other people who were even more senior than me with their work, and I could always leave on time. It wasn't too challenging. It was really refreshing time. And that organization, the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal, and the which is it's the same tribunal as the Rwanda Tribunal for the genocide in Rwanda. I was really proud of working for that organization because they've successfully jailed over 100 war criminals. And we had our sister organization, the ICC, the big famous one, just up the road, also in The Hague, who had a much lower record than us of putting people away. so that was nice. And then in 2020, COVID, my wife got pregnant, and we decided, as we've always wanted to do, to try and move to the Czech Republic. Luckily, my career had enough years behind it that I could apply for a job in what was called the GSA in Prague, which GSA, it's the European GNSS Agency. Do you know it?
Never heard of it.
Galileo, ring any bells? Galileo is the European satellite navigation system. And that organization in Prague is responsible for the Galileo navigation system and another system, probably now more than one more, but when I arrived there was also one called EGNOS, which is a satellite system used to improve the signal of other satellite systems. So for example, EGNOS makes GPS, the American system, even more accurate. Yeah, so your mobile phone probably has Galileo and EGNOS capabilities. Anyway, so enough. I got a job there, and obviously after 2 weeks being there, lockdown again. So I was working from home for several months, and then actually, you know, I for the second time in my career only, I had some sort of bad experience. I couldn't get on with my boss. And I was at a point in my life, and that will become clear in our conversation, where I didn't feel that I'm in the position that I need to take shit anymore, you know? So I thought my boss in Prague was being a bit unreasonable, and, you know, if she didn't want to be reasonable with me, it wasn't working out. So when my daughter was born, I left. And actually, at that point, I decided, that's it, I'll give up on that career. And first of all, Teresa and I will both take 2 years off from work and enjoy the first 2 years of our daughter's life, Sharka. We called her after the friend in Paris, yeah, because that's the reason we met. That's funny because, you know, now we're waiting for our second daughter, who will be called Carolina. And one logic behind calling her Carolina is that name works in English, Czech and Danish. But Sharka, it didn't. So there was a very specific reason for that. Nonetheless, so us leaving our careers in 2021 was the result of having achieved a certain level of financial freedom, which is basically now related to the work that I do. So what had happened was, in my career, since I moved to the Netherlands, I was paid very generously, put it that way. But it was only in 2016 that somebody had given me a book. I don't even want to say the name of the book because I don't recommend it, you know, but it was a random personal finance book. And it was the first time I even thought about it, because in my profession, most people were making enough money that they didn't think about future financial security. I read this book and I was like, Jesus Christ. I realized that how you want your next 10, 20, 30, 40 years to look is completely up to you now. Yeah. And I realized that a lot of the conversations I was having in the office, my whole career, people were always talking about, how much are we getting a raise this year? Even though we were earning tons, and complaining about the pension, you know. I had friends, they were 33, 34 years old, and the only thing they spoke about most of the time was their pension. You know, I'm like, in 35 years, you might get this. You might not, you know? So it was, I had this sort of personal financial awakening in 2016. And to be honest with you, as a British person, talking about money is taboo, and I'm not necessarily comfortable with it, but the reason I do it now is because I help other people with money as well. Nonetheless, so I started learning everything about personal finance, and I was excited because I realized I didn't have children. Teresa was on board. We could make dramatic changes, and we could make, for example, really ambitious 5, 10, 15-year plans. And that's what we did. So I made a plan. How can I effectively be work optional in 10 years? And obviously, financial independence, financial freedom is not just one thing. It's a spectrum. You know, if you have 1,000 crowns now that you didn't have yesterday, you have some more choice and some more option than you had yesterday, even if it's small, but you're more financially independent than you were yesterday. So I made a 10-year plan, which involved cutting expenses, maximizing our income for that period of time, and investing. But I read every personal finance book, and I went on every possible personal finance course, and I find it fascinating. And I also find it surprising that being better with money is something so accessible to most of us, but something so many of us push away, you know? Because money is about two things. It's about numbers and emotions and behavior, yeah? And that's the challenging part, because everyone knows you should save money. The more you save, the better. If you invest, your money will grow faster, right? But the block is the emotion. It's the culture. It's what you've learned your whole life, things like that. So already back in 2016, 2017, when I started changing my own relationship with money, I already thought that would be kind of cool to coach other people about this, not to for example, do traditional financial advice, stuff like that, because there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But I personally think there's like 10 steps that need to come before you are mature, literate, and in control of yourself enough to invest successfully. And those things are the things that I focus on now. So I took those 2 years off, and then a year and a half or two ago, I started working on my coaching project, and I've developed a program called FU Money. And
what does the abbreviation stand for?
yeah, so there's the PG version, the family-friendly version, which is, you could say, financially unconstrained. On the other hand, the real version is the FU Money represents an amount of money which allows you to say FU to someone or something that you don't want to do. Again, there's a spectrum. I mean, nobody's saying you have to have so much money that you can say FU to your boss and sail away, you know? I mean, that's extreme. But again, as I was saying before about the 1,000 crowns that you didn't have yesterday, that's 1,000 crowns that you might say, FU McDonald's, I can eat something healthy instead, you know? So I've developed that. Mostly I deliver it as a program over 100 days, where I walk people through my 10 steps, the FU Money system, which goes from your financial past, because as I said, the biggest challenges we do talk about numbers, but the biggest challenges are most people don't even know what their goals are. They also don't know how much money they've earned. If I asked you, and you don't have to answer with a number, but if I asked you, since you began working, from the first day you went to work as a 15, 16-year-old, whatever it was, approximately how much money do you think you've made? It's, you know, I'm 42 years old. If I did that exercise, when I did it, 6, 7 years ago, you know, it was 800,000 or 900,000 euros. I was like, what? Wow. And then the next question was, and what do I have now? If 800, 900,000 euros have come into my life, what do I have now? A 20,000 euro student debt, 10,000 euros of credit card debt, and 0 in my bank account. So it's like, oh, shit, wake up, you know? And that is the normal situation. So seeing that, for most people, especially, okay, let's say the demographic that I work with and my network mostly represents people who are middle level or upper level professionals. Most of these people fall into that category where a lot of more money than they thought entered their life, and most of it slipped through the fingers. So that's really enlightening. And then we also help people to understand that there are also costs with your job, costs associated with your job. For example, somebody might be earning 50,000 crowns a month and the contract says 40 hours a week. So, okay, 12,000 a week and, well, let's say net 50,000. Okay, I know it's quite high, maybe. 50,000 net is 12,000 a week and 40 hours, but you either drive or you take a train to get to work. That costs you, I don't know, 200 crowns per day, 500 crowns per day, and it costs you an hour in each direction. You wear a suit to the office. If you didn't have that job, you wouldn't wear a suit. You'd dress cool like we do, right? And there's all of these things which, if you think about it, they are costs directly associated with your job that you've chosen to do, and they also cost you time. So you can recalculate your income. It's not 12,000 a month, because after you start deducting the amount you actually pay, because you maybe you have to go somewhere, spend 100 crowns for lunch every day, your lunch break, it's an hour, but it's not really you time, because you work in Mojnov maybe or something. You're not where you want to spend an hour chilling. So you calculate all those things and maybe you're earning 6,000 crowns per week. And then it opens up your mind to possibilities that, hey, maybe I could be working in a cafe because I like the smell of coffee and I like talking to people, and I'll be earning more than 6,000 a month. So actually, by being a barista instead of being a junior manager or whatever, logistics, I can be even financially better off. So these are just like mental exercises introducing real numbers.
So it's not only about investing, but the overall career.
I want to be really clear. For example, I am not a licensed investment advisor. I'm not a tax advisor. I'm not even a legal advisor, even though I am a lawyer. As I said before, investing, it's at the end. And when I talk about investing, I'm explaining what investing is, what are the different types of investing, real estate investing, investing in the stock market through ETFs or index funds, what are the benefits, what are the risks, what's better about one than the other. Maybe investing in an ETF is more passive than buying an apartment to rent because you don't need to fix broken toilets, stuff like that. So that element of investing, I will not ever, and I don't want to sell or even recommend specific products. That's not what I'm doing.
So what's the most common piece of advice that you find yourself giving to your clients?
The most common piece of advice is I tell people to look at their money, observe their money, not budgeting. I'm not a fan of budgeting. I rather people become ultra conscious and aware of their money by tracking, and then look at that. And I have exercises and questions that I go through with my clients, which help them to link those expenses with their values and whether they are contributing and promoting those values or taking away from them. For example, if you ask me what are my values, I might say family, you know. Family comes first. Work should never come before family, blah, blah, blah. But then if you look at your money, it's like looking in a mirror, yeah? Why am I spending the equivalent of 60 hours of my time commuting or doing something else work-related, and I'm only spending 6 hours of my time playing with my kids? So there's these really interesting exercises where you can link your values and your goals with your income. And it's really fun and it's enlightening. And then, because if you don't have that insight, the changes you make and try and make are really arbitrary. It's like trying to follow a diet. You see a book, you're like, yeah, this diet is the good one right now, yeah? And you follow it for a month and then afterwards you go back, you know? Whereas what I'm trying to do is like mindful eating. You listen to your body, you try and figure out what it needs, you eat slowly, you recognize when you've had enough. And enough is a big concept in my philosophy and my coaching, because what most of us, especially in the modern culture and the way our economic system works, we are driven to consume and we don't know why. We buy things for status, because the reality is most of us need a certain type of car which does a certain type of thing. Very few of us need that to be a Mercedes or a Range Rover, right? It's just an example, but if you can say, you know, I want to be happier and I want to feed the part of my life that makes me happier, family, hobbies, which you might not even have time for now. But on the other hand, I'm considering buying a Range Rover. If you are shown, well, you could work less hard or for less hours or retire 5 years earlier by not buying that Range Rover, maybe it's going to give you a bit more of a difficult decision in a good way, because most of us are operating our money lives on autopilot based on external influences, things we've learned from our parents, from our culture, from our colleagues, and finally trying to, what's the expression? Trying to impress people who don't know us and don't give a shit about us, right? So it's really, you know, the sexy part is saying, you know, the punchline. I try and help my clients who are 25 to 45 achieve total financial independence within 10 to 15 years. That's the sexy part, because unfortunately, marketing and sales is a reality. It's not something that I necessarily like, and it's the part of my work that I'm most challenged by, personally, marketing, but it has to be done. So the truth is, yes, that can be your reality. But to get there, once people sign up, we're really focusing on emotions and spending a lot of time on what you really want from your life.
So I have a question because you talking about that brought me to something that you may hear quite often, and that is, we don't know what happens tomorrow. Let's enjoy living in the moment. So what's the counter argument?
Um, there's two counter arguments. The first is that is actually an easy excuse that a lot of people uh, don't really necessarily think about when they say that, because uh, a lot of the people who will say live for today, they betray that every day by sacrificing so many potential things that would make them happy or whatever, and they go and work too hard, stress out, stuff like that. So if you're living for today, and on the other hand, you're doing a job you hate, you're not living for today. So it's just an excuse to justify spending money easily. The other thing is, the real truth is, with a bit of introspection and doing the kind of exercises that I go through with my clients, you will end up wealthier and happier during the process of getting wealthy. You'll spend less, you might earn more, that's up to you. And through it all, you will be happier. So you will be living more for the day. Because every day you will feel that you're being true to yourself and you're actually building towards your goals, not someone else's. You know? So it's really fun. It's pretty deep, you know. On average, I probably spend 10 or 12 hours with each client. That's also, you know, why it's so different from traditional financial advice, because then you're trying to deliver a message to be able to sell a product within 20 or 30 minutes. And obviously that's not what I'm trying to do, because in the end, as a coach, rather than a consultant or somebody trying to be responsible for your financial decisions, I'm just trying to help you understand what you want to achieve, and you have to do it yourself.
So do you work with international clients or you focus on Czech clientele?
I'm not focused on Czech clients, and perhaps that's the result of my adult life so far, and even my childhood being an expat. Almost all of my clients are expats. I've got a British guy in Sweden at the moment. I've got a Greek girl in Amsterdam. You know, that's how it is. Most of my clients tend to be from countries that I've been living in. So that's Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Germany, France, and the UK.
Because I can imagine that the financial, let's call it financial landscape, for lack of better term, is very different in all the countries, right? Because in Czech Republic, we don't really use credit cards. There's not really school debts, right? And people don't get in debt that easily, right? So they've got a lot of free capital that they only spend on their car, their living, and eating, right? So what to do with the rest of their money, right?
Oh, interesting. So I didn't know that about Czechs. From what you just said, it sounded more like Germans that I'm aware of. They are famous savers and they tend to save in cash, for example. I assumed with all of the houses being built, I mean, around me at least, where I live, that many, if not most Czechs, must be in debt on their mortgage. As regards the rest, I don't know. Debt is debt, with the only slight difference being for a mortgage, because everybody needs a roof over their head. So that's not necessarily bad debt. The other good kind of debt, a little bit riskier, would be people who are sophisticated enough to take debt for investing, but I would classify that as a type of business. The other thing I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I very much might be wrong, about Czechs and Czech financial culture in general, is there's a lot of suspicion around financial services.
Absolutely.
First of all, rightly so, because I've scraped the surface myself, and I'm aware that there's a huge number of questionably qualified young people and students offering financial services in this country.
I think that's partially due to the Ponzi schemes that are here. So yeah, like you get hired with the promise of financial independence, which is to me, sorry,
Yeah,
like a buzzword at this
yes,
point, right?
yeah,
Because everybody's using it, everybody's talking about the poor father, rich father book, right? And yeah, there's a lot of stigma when it comes to financial advisors, and it raises a lot of red flags. So I can imagine it must be really hard for you to advertise this kind of service or talk about it, try to practice it in Czech Republic, because yeah, it's kind of bad here.
yeah. Well, the thing about that, as I said, I scratched the surface, and I've seen some of the financial products that they are selling, in particular on the investment side. There's not really anything wrong with most of the insurance products they're selling, but on the investment side, the garbage that they're selling should be illegal. They are repackaged ETFs. I won't name the name. I don't want to get sued by anyone, but I mean, I saw one which was basically 4 low-cost ETFs repackaged and sold as an ETF.
What's an ETF?
An exchange-traded fund. So it's an ultra-low-cost, normally automated type of investment product that just tracks the whole market. So you buy the S&P 500 index fund, you can call it as well. And it just means you track the whole market. You're not choosing winners and losers, you're just tracking the whole market. So the market tends to go up to the right over time, of course, as we've seen recently with dips along the way, but it goes up and to the right over the time. And as Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, many others say, you cannot beat the market, so just buy the whole market. And because of the simplicity of those products, they're incredibly cheap. As low as 0.03% as an annual expense on the product. So this one that I've seen here in Czech Republic is 4 of these ultra low products repackaged into another product, and the expense ratio was, I can't remember if it was 1.5 or 2%. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the type of investment education I do provide, because it's basic mathematics. If you have one product which has a 2% annual expense ratio and one which has basically 0, and you hope that the market or the product goes up 6% per year, let's say, it could be 10, but let's use 6 as an example, then one product, you keep 100% of that 6%, and on the other product, that 2% fee represents 33% of your profits. And if you do that over 10, 20, 30 years, millions of, if you're investing $1,000 a month and using this example of 2%, it's millions of dollars lost to fees. I mean, so yeah, just as an example, in the UK, in the US, in the Netherlands, the industry, and in a way I would prefer we move on in a minute from this subject, because I'm not working in that industry. Mm-hmm. the financial advice sector is much more mature and professional and well regarded. So there's more reputation to be lost by financial advisors. Basically, it's better. But you know, as a European lawyer, and as a lawyer who worked for the European agency responsible for regulating European investment markets, the rules are the same here. So the way that financial advisors operate here is regulated by the same rules as in France and Denmark. So in theory, it shouldn't be as bad as it is. Sorry, I can go on about everything. I mean,
no worries. You're making my job easier basically by going on and talking.
verbal diarrhea.
Yeah, and no, I wouldn't call it that because you know with every question that pops in my head, you answer it by going on, right? So what I was really interested about was your career because you went from procurement to law, then you kind of dabbled in war crimes. You went and even got around to space satellites thingies, right? The Galileo thing. What's the overarching skill that helped you, or how does one, you know, transfer, you know, so many on at first sight different career paths, right?
I really appreciate this question. I was talking to someone else about it a couple of days ago. The chief financial officer of Model, the cardboard company in Opava. So just to slightly correct something is my career, it sounded really cool. I would like to leave it that way, but I was not working on war crimes. So actually I was working on procurement in all of these organizations. I mean, I'm a proactive person, so in any organization, I try and get as close as possible to the core business. But so I started in crime, but I quickly moved into procurement because, you know, at the time I worked for Europol, I think the budget was maybe 100 million euros, 150. And they have quite complex things to spend their money on. For example, huge and specialized IT systems which need to be built in a way that they can secure classified data, for example, and transmit and receive classified data, software for detection of child pornography, stuff like this. I mean, brilliant. Being in procurement meant that I could help all of these organizations with their core mission. Then when I moved to Paris, this organization was established to respond to the financial crisis in 2008. It's called the European Securities and Markets Authority. I was senior procurement officer there, and okay, I didn't have a boss, so effectively I was somehow I set up the procurement department, which was fun. So again, it's procurement, not the core business, but that was interesting because I had the chance to basically fully establish a department, the policies, the procedures, and then help the organization grow quite rapidly.
This basically leads to my next question, and that was you've tried being in the role of a manager, let's call it that, right? Or in management, right? Where you mentioned you had to, you know, work weekends, work nights. You were also in the role of an employee who took shit from their boss, and now you are your own boss, right? You're an entrepreneur. So how is it like, or how was it like?
Just one thing, because I want to go back to what you said before, which was what skills or what focus would I recommend for someone else? And for me, it's things like always pushing beyond the boundaries of what you're supposed to be doing in your job. So I was always either volunteering or just doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. You know, taking decisions which are above your pay grade. If you get in trouble, say sorry. I mean, you might not get fired, whatever. This is, honestly, these tricks are how to grow your career fast, but also, I mean, who wants to be stuck in a box, right? So the other thing I said to this guy I was talking to the other day is I feel like my success was every time I was in a room or in a meeting, people assumed that I was more senior than I was. And somehow over time, I was almost drawn to that level of seniority like a magnet, you know, because I don't know, it just seems boring to be stuck in a box. So I was always kind of moving fast and breaking stuff. And especially sometimes in these semi-public organizations, like the culture is not to move fast and break stuff. You know, it's quite bureaucratic and da-da-da. But even in a public bureaucratic environment, there are important people who really value that type of behavior. So the other thing is work hard. I mean, unfortunately, if you can do everything else right, but if you don't work hard, at least, you know, for 5-10 years, you know, maybe then you can like start pulling back on the gas. But yeah, put yourself in uncomfortable positions, volunteer, take decisions you probably shouldn't because that's your boss's decision to take. Yeah, be courageous, get out of your comfort zone. To your second question about working for myself, it's great, obviously. It's freedom. It's harder. It's much harder. I mean, you know, as I said in the first place, the reason I'm in this situation is because I achieved a certain amount of financial independence. So it's not like month-to-month financial pressure. It's more like those days which we all have where you don't feel motivated. If you don't have an employment contract telling you you have to show up, you know, you can just not show up. So, and that can slow you down sometimes and it can be frustrating. But the fact that I can have an idea about something I want to change and I don't have to ask anyone, I just change it. It's awesome. I mean, I never thought about entrepreneurship until 3, 4, 5 years ago. And now once I'm trying it, I'm just, to be honest, I'm filled with ideas about other entrepreneurial ventures that I want to do. And I'm on the edge of a few now. I don't want to give away any secrets, but Opava, where I lived for 4 years and close to the village where I live now, Opava is in need of some international level services. It's a city with a consumer base which has money. Many young people who have worked abroad and they're looking for the same level of services that they had in, you know, Denmark, Germany, whatever. So I think there's space for entrepreneurs, Czech or otherwise, in this region to bring an international level of services. You can see that with every time a really good quality restaurant opens around here. I'm not just talking about Austria, Opava as well. It's packed, man, every day of the week. Because I think the competition is slightly lacking. I think that's probably better in Ostrava. There's more services here. Yeah, so.
So I have another question, and that is relevant to you moving around the world and working. How would you motivate people to, you know, move to Netherlands and start a career there? Because I can imagine it must be really hard, you know, because overcoming the language barrier, finding an apartment, you know, integrating yourself in a system that you don't know how it works. And do you even have marketable skills for that for that type of labor market that you're going into. You know, because if you have qualified people or people with university degrees, right? They will be afraid of having to work, you know, a blue collar job, for instance. So what's the advice there?
It's funny, the first thing that popped into my head when you asked that is something that I've spoken to many Czech people about. And if we're talking about advice to Czech people, I would say everyone should go out and see the world. And it's not because of what the world can offer, it's because of what the Czech Republic offers. This country is amazing, and a lot of people who have never left here don't realize how good it is. It's a real common problem here. People will complain about the public transport or the medical care, whatever it is. And I mean, they just need to go to London or Paris or Berlin. I mean, the normal stuff is harder. You know, you move to Paris, good luck finding an apartment. Forget it. I'm not even talking about the price. You can't find a flat. No way. You know, you go to a viewing of an apartment in Paris and you're in a queue of like 100 people. They're going through the flat, and then like you have to present some dossier. Life is good here, man. Security, you know, I mean, I've never heard of, I'm probably wrong, but I've never heard of anyone even getting beaten up in the street here. I'm sure, of course it happens, but so that's the first thing. I think there should be something like military service where Czechs get sent abroad to understand how great, I mean, I'm a huge lover of Czech Republic, so to understand how great it is. And then for other people, I think everybody, I mean, I know it's not possible for everybody, but I think everyone should give it a go. To go abroad, try it out. I think it's in many ways more difficult than when I moved from England to the Netherlands 20 years ago, because it was cheap. I could rent an apartment for cheap. That internship, I was only earning 500 euros a month. And I had some sort of childhood savings from my mum, which covered the rest for 6 months. But it was easier. Also, I was working in international organizations. Of course, I lived in The Hague, so I knew a lot of people working for Shell. They have their headquarters there. And I feel like in those days, the competition was less. Fewer people were trying to be expats. Skills were valuable. Fewer people had master's degrees. So now everybody has a master's degree. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. Everyone has a master's degree. It's not special. Everybody knows which organizations pay the most and stuff, and they want to apply. So, I mean, I was doing recruitment for the organizations I worked for, and I would have, you know, 300 applications for one job. And I think that's normal these days. I doubt that was the case when I started back in 2006. So it's tough out there, but I see the benefit, the character building benefits of going abroad. You asked about the language barrier. Personally, never found it a problem. And for most people in most of the countries I lived, I didn't find it a big problem. And here it's been the hardest, simply because the language is the hardest. I'm not a good linguist myself, but as a Dane, a Germanic language, who spoke German in the past, it was very easy, for example, to pick up Dutch. And you don't need it anyway. Everyone speaks English. But, you know, it's nice to have. And then obviously I lived in Denmark. French, when I lived in France, I managed through really hard studying. I got to the level B2 within like a year. And Czech, I've been working just as hard on Czech, and I'm 5 years in. And I would say I'm doing better than most expats. I manage a lot of stuff in Czech, but it's tough, man. So the language barrier living in Czech Republic is harder than anywhere I've lived. But that doesn't mean, even in a country like Denmark and the Netherlands, the job market, even though they say it's not, and the official working language of all the companies is English, you're excluded. If you don't speak Dutch and Danish, your CV gets moved aside from many jobs, even if it's not a requirement. You know what I mean? There's that residual discrimination, which is maybe natural in some ways, but it makes it more difficult for foreigners with all the same skills as a Danish person. If they're 50-50, they'll take the Dane. Do you know what I mean? At least I've been reading a lot about that recently. I mean, it wasn't my experience because I am Danish, even though not myself even fluent. So as a child, even though my mother tongue should be Danish, my parents only taught me English.
Bjarni, thank you so much for joining me today. We are way past
sorry.
our episode limit, so I have 5 last questions.
I'll do them quick, yeah?
For the quick pick rubric. So I would like to ask you very briefly, how do you keep your cultural roots alive?
Good question. I think the answer to that is probably I don't really have cultural roots, because I grew up everywhere. I told you when I moved to my home country, I had some sort of strange culture shock crisis. I probably feel more Danish than British. I love alcohol. I used to drink like a Dane until last summer, but I've severely cut down now. So not much. I'm a chameleon. Like I manage to feel at home pretty easily everywhere. I don't miss any food or anything like that. I love Czech food. I don't need it. I don't need the English stuff or the Danish stuff.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you. What about a movie or a song that would capture your life here in the Moravian Silesian region or Opava? Is there something that pops in your
I don't know
head?
why it popped in my head. You know that movie Slunce, what's it? Slunce
Oh yes,
Jahoda. Yeah, I don't know. It's not like that. But now I live in a relatively small village. I live in Hradec nad Morovicí, and it's not like that anyway. It's not agricultural, but I do feel like I'm getting a bit of the Czech village experience, and I like it. It's calm. It's cool.
So is this what makes you want to call Hradec nad Moravicí your home or the village that you live in?
What makes me want to call it home is it's surrounded by hills and nature. I live next to the river. It's safe and calm environment for my daughter and my soon to arrive daughter. It's great, man. I've lived in enough big cities. I love the calm of the Czech village. Yeah.
That sounds good. What about your hidden gem in this region or in Ostrava? I don't know where you like to hang out.
Well, we have a cottage in Podhrady. Do you know it? Close to Vitkov.
Never heard of it.
Okay.
No.
The cameraman knows because he's from Opava. But Podhrady is close to Vitkov, and it's on the Moravicí River. And we have a cottage which is like quite far away from the road in a small cluster of 3 or 4 cottages, and it's right on the river. And like when Teresa first took me there, I was like, you're joking. This is like so unbelievably beautiful. So, I mean, for me, that's one of the gems. And I really like the area around Chelana is very nice. Yeah, it's not a hidden gem though. Everyone knows about it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Also, it's a bit snobby up there. Some of the stuff I don't like that. So Podhrady.
So what about tips for a trip to wherever you imagine?
In the world or in Czech Republic?
In the world, yeah, for sure. Where you've lived, for example.
Oh, I see, like that. Well, I didn't live there, but my parents lived in Nepal
Okay.
for a period of time, I think when I was at university. That was an amazing country. I mean, seeing mountains which are almost 9,000 meters high in front of you is just, it can't not be breathtaking, you know? So I recommend Nepal as a place to travel, but honestly, my favorite continent is Europe. We just have so much diversity and so many languages in such a small place and different cuisines. For me, Europe, like if I had to choose a continent that I could never live again, it would still be Europe.
I see. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really do
Thanks a
appreciate
lot,
you.
man. Yeah, cheers.
And yeah, I will see you guys in the next episode. So goodbye and take care. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Ostrava Expat Center.